Hey there, Philip here from Manning the Fort. Today I'll be walking through how I approached the fire and object source lighting effects on my Kit Bash Novitiates Kill Team. The methods I use here are pretty broadly applicable and are similar to how I handle OSL on other minis. While easily the most visibly striking part of the paint job for this kill team, it's the part that actually took me the least time to paint, thanks to my handy dandy airbrush. You can definitely accomplish something like what I did here with a traditional brush and glazes, but it's going to take a lot longer. First, let's talk a little bit about light. When you're painting a secondary light source onto a model, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. First, light travels in straight lines. We call them rays of light for a reason. If there's an obstruction between your secondary light source and where you portray that light hitting, it's gonna look off. In a minute, I'll show you where the airbrush can be a real help with this. Second, most OSL, including what I'm going to show today, does not conform with reality. There's a concept called the inverse square law, which describes how the intensity of light fades over a distance. It says the intensity of projected light doesn't drop in a linear fashion, but rather in an exponential one the further away the surface reflecting that light is from the light source. I won't go any deeper than that because, honestly, I don't really understand it, and because I'm going to kind of intentionally break that rule on this project. Also, truth be told, if these models were standing in the sort of general zenithal light that we tend to use in miniature painting, the reflected light from their various torches and things wouldn't be nearly as intense as I'm presenting it here. On the other hand, painting the rest of the miniature in a dark setting would frankly just look weird on the tabletop. Where I'm aiming is a sort of compromise, a stylized look that borrows heavily from things like John Blanche's 40K art. I've learned a lot about painting with light from two main sources. The book Color and Light by James Gurney is a great reference for all sorts of topics on, well, color and light. It's an invaluable resource that I reference regularly. There's an Amazon affiliate link below if you want to pick up a copy. The other is a much larger YouTube creator, Marco Frazzoni. He has some great in-depth tutorials that get pretty advanced on the subject. For today, though, we're going quick and easy with our OSL for a striking effect on the tabletop, so let's get to it. My primary paints for this project are something that I purchased pretty recently, Pro Acryl's Transparent paint line. In the past, I've used acrylic ink for this sort of thing, and it works great. Contrast paint through an airbrush can also work well. What intrigued me about the Pro Acryl Transparents is that they have a matte finish. Inks are often very glossy, and even contrast tends to end up with a satin finish that I then have to hit with a matte varnish. Since I've already painted my metallics, I'd prefer not to have to matte them down with varnish. The very first step for OSL on these minis began even before I laid down my base colors. When I was doing my zenithal highlight, in addition to spraying from above, I also made sure to spray my white ink heavily into the area of the fires themselves, and then angled my airbrush to line up with the direction of that fire relative to the rest of the model. Since I was mostly working with transparent paints, this means I get a quick and easy value jump from the beginning, and this is going to be the basis for how I do the entirety of the OSL effect. Working from my white base, I start with the Pro Acryl Transparent Yellow. Marco uses medium yellow azo ink, and it also works really well here. I've done it myself. I was prepared to switch to yellow ink if I needed to at this step, but the Pro Acryl has plenty of intensity. Also, as advertised, it dries matte. I spray in short, controlled bursts as always, and for this step I cover the entire area of the fire itself. Fire is hottest toward the center, so in the reverse of how I would normally highlight a model, I leave the innermost areas of the fire with the brightest color closest to white, and get a little heavier the further out I go. I also line up the airbrush in the direction the light will travel from the flame and spray it back toward the rest of the model. In this instance, I'm using airbrush overspray to my advantage. The natural dispersion from the nozzle means that areas closer to the flames will be more heavily colored and look brighter, with the saturation fading as objects get further away. This is a quick and easy way to demonstrate how the intensity of the light fades over distance, though it stays a lot brighter a lot longer than it would in real life. Now, it's time to move on to the orange. One of the most common mistakes I see beginners make when painting flames is to go from orange in the center to yellow on the outside. This is the opposite of how fire works. As fire cools, it gets closer to red. Using a little more control on the trigger, I very lightly spray the orange onto the flames, always moving upward. This leaves me with a natural, smooth gradient. I also spray the orange back toward the rest of the model like last time, using the torch position as a guide. I am more gentle and careful this time, as the closer light gets to red, the more quickly it fades from our vision in regular light. That's why people use red lights when they're doing things like stargazing. Next, I break out the red and go even lighter on the very highest parts of the fire. Again, always moving the brush upwards as I spray. And I skip the reflections on the rest of the model entirely on this pass. Finally, I hit the extreme tips with transparent black. In a tip I learned from Marco Frazzoni, I protect everything else from overspray with my finger and intentionally hit the tips of the flames with the outer edge of the spray pattern. This means I still get a gradient even as the fire begins to turn to smoke. I repeat this process across all the models that have large torches somewhere on them, which I think is more than half of this team. Some attempts came out better than others, but they all give the same general effect. Like I said before, I'm intentionally overplaying the amount of light that would actually be reflected, because I want to portray the burning zeal these fanatics have in the God Emperor. Much like the John Blanche art that inspired my entire palette, things are somewhat exaggerated and over the top, but that's the 40K we all know and love. I am starting to do polls on my channel so that my viewers can help guide the direction of things going forward. That first poll has led me to create a third video on this kill team that I didn't intend to originally, and that is how I went about kit bashing them. I had the footage already, but I didn't know anybody else wanted to see it. Turns out you did. If you subscribe, you're more likely to see that video when it comes out and see more polls in the future to guide the rest of my content. If you want to see my video on how I make homemade contrast paints for pennies on the dollar, that link should be on screen now. Until next time, remember that it's just paint, and thanks for watching.